it's no nay never. No nay never, no more shall I fall prey to hackers. No never, no more.
All right, well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for attending the world's least boring HIPAA webinar on healthcare cyber fraud. Really excited to be here. I've got some great guests that I'm really excited to introduce because we'll have three different insights coming into this topic, which is a big one. Fraud's only getting worse, and cybercrime is only getting worse and worse. So I'd like to introduce you to Joe Parker. Joe is with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. And we also have Tom Stroud with PNC Bank, their healthcare division. That's all they specialize in. And then I'm Ron Hsu. I'm the chief cyber technologist at SIP Oasis. We put the LOL in cyber technology because we find that boring technology doesn't make people safer. They don't do any better from protecting themselves from cybercrime. So, Joe, why don't you just take a quick moment, and a lot of people might not be familiar with who CISA is. So kind of introduce yourself a little bit, and kind of generally speaking, our format is going to be, we'll talk about good things and bad things. So it's not going to be all purely horror and mayhem, but we are going to give you, before we get started, I want to do a little housekeeping items here real quick. We got 3 content promises for you. And those are, first, this is going to be very non-technical. This is not a technical presentation, and we're not going to confuse you. So the second one is it's going to be jargon-free to the greatest extent possible. We're not going to confuse you, baffle you with techno jargon because you don't care. And then lastly, there's going to be useful stuff here that doesn't cost you anything. So this isn't a sales pitch. We're genuinely wanting to contribute helpful content to the healthcare community because y'all are just out here trying to save lives. Meanwhile, the jerks all around the world are trying to put you out of business, and the auditors are trying to come in and find you after the battle's all over. So if you have a question, anything that comes up, please post it in the Q&A for the webinar. And then lastly, as you may have noticed, we're having a drawing for a $300 gift card to Helen, which is one of the best restaurants in Birmingham now, fine dining at its best. And just for attending here, if you make it to the end, you get an an entry into the drawing. And then we'll have a couple of bonus entries that we'll talk about at the end of the presentation. So, okay, sorry, thanks about all that. I had to get it out of the way though. So Joe, tell the good folks here a little bit who CISA is, what y'all are all about, and well, how you make life better.
Thank you, Ron. Thanks for inviting me, and hello everyone. I'm Joe Parker. I'm a Huntsville, Alabama native. Just finished up a 29-year career in the DoD, working some counterintelligence and cyber, and then a convergence of cyber counterintelligence kind of thing over the years. And in January, I moved over to join CISA. And most of you probably aren't or weren't familiar much with CISA, and I wasn't either until until about a year ago or so. But CISA is the newest federal agency. We've only been in existence for 5 years, and so when you start a new agency, you have to kind of form your headquarters element first, and then you start building out the field. So we're just now sort of building out the field, and that's how my position came about. So I'm the only cybersecurity advisor for North Alabama, so sort of Birmingham North, and then all of Tennessee. I have a counterpart, Stephanie Watt, that sits in Montgomery, who is our state coordinator, closely working with the governor's office and state and local governments and those kinds of things. And then we have Clyde Rourke, who is in South Alabama, covering partners down in that area of the world. So the CISA mission, we were created to lead the national effort to understand and manage, and reduce risk to our cyber and physical infrastructure. So it's not just cyber, it's cyber and physical infrastructure. And we do that in a variety of ways. But partnerships and things that we're doing right now are key. We do have 6 different divisions we operate under. Cybersecurity division is obviously one of them. We also, though, work in emergency communications, 911 systems, making sure that we are resilient, in any sort of a natural disaster or event. Those kinds of things. And then we have physical security division that also incorporates chemical security division. I'm part of the integrated operations division, which is our operations, in which we have all of those specialties ingrained in our field operations. And then at a higher level, we have a stakeholder engagement division that establishes relationships with critical partners. So a lot of the healthcare association groups are part of that to help inform us of the risk and threat, and vice versa, back and forth. But we also, on the cyber side, we engage with, like, Microsoft and CrowdStrike and some of these big vendors, or internet service providers as well, to make sure that we're collaborating. And there's some international effort to that. We do a lot of work with the Australian government, the German government, and the UK particularly, but others as well. So here, again, I came over in January, and our primary focus this year, we do have 16 critical sectors that we cover. Healthcare is obviously one of them, but also every year our agency focuses on a particular a couple of different sectors. And this year, healthcare has been our Director Jan Easterly. This has been our healthcare has been our primary focus this year, to reach out to healthcare and to provide services. We also are providing support to water and wastewater this year, as well as elections. Obviously, we have an election coming up, and so we're providing a lot of support to state and local governments and those kinds of things.
Thanks, Drew.
On that.
That's great. What I love is, as we all been talking about HIPAA, which is kind of the focus of this in healthcare, people oftentimes overlook the physical components of HIPAA, because it's not just about cyber privacy, but it's also about the physical aspects of it. There's physical security parts of HIPAA as well. So Tom, let's get Tom to introduce himself a little bit. Talk about Tom. He's been in the banking industry for a long time here around Birmingham, and he's working with the healthcare and part of PNC Bank. So Tom, why don't you speak up a little bit and give us a thumbnail about who you are and what you're all about, and then we'll get into the meat of things.
Thank you, Ron. I appreciate you making me follow the cyber James Bond of Joe Parker. Not near as exciting as that. So I did start my career in the healthcare world after getting a graduate degree in healthcare economics. Worked at UAB, ran their financial clinical parts of clinical trials, and then did some practice management down there. Then I was an entrepreneur for many years and started my third career in banking about 11 years ago, and have worked with a lot of physicians, vets, doctors over the years. And now that's my primary job. That's all I do, is just work in the healthcare field. And I always say that I hope to be the one who helps on the front end prevent the fraud. That's what we always try to do. Unfortunately, most of the time, I'm the one on the back end that has to work with the cleanup from the financial perspective after we've had a fraud incident, and an account has been shut down, and we're scrambling to try to figure out how we work, on a day-to-day with our operating account and get enough cash to make everything work. So those are the things that I hope that we can talk through today, as far as how can we prevent some of those. And as you guys have mentioned, the biggest fear that everyone has and I can remember this when I first started in banking, many people were hesitant to do online banking because of the fraud that they had. And, I tried to explain to them that the fraud, that the computer won't cause any fraud. You're going to be the one that causes the fraud. It's going to be your actions that actually does that. So that's on you, and kind of how you work with that. And we have seen over the last 11 years some pretty sophisticated fraudulent activity. And so I know we'll go over some of that today. And as a bank, we are constantly trying to combat the bad guys, but man, it's hard. They stay one step ahead, and we try our best to catch up.
Well said. And then I guess on my approach, we try to do the same, where we work with healthcare clients and try to keep them proactively both compliant with HIPAA from the control standpoint, but also responsive to the threats that are out there. So we all have war stories, I'm sure. Joe, you're kind of closest to the front lines a little bit. He's the sort of CISA is the better call Saul for a lot of folks, where when it really hits the fan, and they're the folks that you call. So Joe, maybe give us what's a recent, cyber security or breach story that you've heard out of the healthcare sector that might be fresh for some folks, and then what did we learn from it, and then we'll ask Tom the same question.
Yeah, thanks. I'll throw out two real quick ones. One of them, we had a nursing home that was hit by a business email compromise. This is in a small town, so it was the only nursing facility for this township in the area. They had gotten some grant money to rebuild or expand their facility. It was actually $500,000 to do this. So they had contracted, with a company to start the construction of this, and so they, in the process of this, their construction company was exploited. They didn't have what we call multi-factor authentication. So there's multiple, authenticators to log in, to their email and these kinds of things. And it makes it easy for the adversary to not just assume their identity, but also to really take over their email account. And when you can do that, they go to the sent folder, look in the sent folder, and they saw some exchanges of email between the nursing home and their organization about the transfer of these funds to them for the cost of this build. The adversary just simply re-engaged that conversation, emailed the same contact and said, "Hey, I just wanted to see if you had started or had a plan for when you were going to process this payment." She said, "Well, I was actually going to get back with you. We thought we might do it next week." She said, "Good. I was hoping to catch you in time. We changed our bank account information," right? Which is a pretty typical scam, fraudulent scam in this case. So she actually transferred and wired the information. The information went. It took days before they figured out what was going on, and then this, again, small company, didn't have IT, didn't have a lot of resources, called someone in to kind of help look at it. They spent a few days kind of looking at it, and then finally we get a call, and we come in and try to help as well. At that point, it was a little too late because the information had already had left the country, or the funds. They did have cyber insurance. That was a good thing, right? And the bad part is the cyber insurance, the premiums or whatever deductibles that they were paying for, the insurance only covered 300,000 of that 500,000. So they were still out $200,000, which is a lot for a small nursing home, there. And this happened to be in my hometown. That's one of the advantages of this job that I absolutely love, is pouring into my home community where I grew up. Right. And so this was a nursing home that I had, several family members in, in the past, kind of stuff. So it just kind of really ticked me off because we did determine that the adversaries of this, tool and technique, there's a particular tool that a lot of the ransomware actors and the business email, which, by the way, we have numbers that show that business email compromises, the money that is made from the business email compromises has surpassed ransomware by far. So a lot of these threat actors, that were doing ransomware kind of things, they're somewhat mimicking the business email compromise schemes, but the tools are kind of the same that both of those actors kind of use. And one is called Cobalt Strike. It's just a tool that is actually used for a pen test kind of thing to where we would test our system, but it got out into the wild, and it's kind of a common tool that they use. It's very effective. Long story short is we were able to track this one back to Russia. So this was part of a Russian, not necessarily directed by the Russian government, but sort of the whole of country effort to disrupt the U.S. And our healthcare infrastructure, due to the war in Ukraine and those kinds of things.
Let me throw in as a jargon, as the resident jargon Nazi here, for those of you who might not be aware, a pen test in our world is a penetration test, which is a technique that the bad guys and the bad guys use to exploit things, and the good guys use it to find vulnerabilities that we can close. So the bad guys use it to get you, and the good guys use it to find the holes and close them. So what do those guys do now, Joe?
Yeah, so we had to start almost a complete rebuild process, right? So they needed assistance, like from managed service provider type support, to come in and help them. One thing that I could I'll briefly mention now, but could expand later, is that because of the healthcare industry being a focus area of the U.S. government right now and CISA, we have a lot of no-cost sort of services for these things like this as well. And so one of those is a organization called Multi-State ISAC, MS-ISAC, and it's a nonprofit that we fund, and they were able to come in and help them as well to kind of rebuild, some of the infrastructure and to be more resilient later. We also, they were able to find, more cases of once the bad guy gets into your network, then they started extorting the family members of the patients, right? So once they get into that and they were successful there, now they have access to some of the patient family members in those kinds of things. And really, we want to get more resiliency, right? And that's where Ron and Tom, that's where, coming in and having a plan so that you're not, when you're under stress, you're not trying to figure out what to do, and how to contain something is very, very important. We talk about this a lot, but being resilient, having the basics down, the basic, what we call cyber hygiene, having that multi-factor, having those defenses in place that align with what the adversaries are using right now.
And here's a little, spoiler alert. All of the things that Joe's talking about that are things that it takes, those are also controls that are required by HIPAA. So we're starting to see now all of the various entities are starting to demand the same things, whether it be your insurance policy or whether it be a regulatory agency, or even honestly common sense still dictates these sorts of things. So I guess since this was they got away with the money from the business email compromise by wiring funds, right? So Tom, are you seeing, I guess what he's seeing in the business email compromise numbers, y'all are probably seeing that in terms of fraud claims. Is that the case?
Yeah, and I want to say something quick about the wire. We've had the same thing happen, Joe, the email compromise, and some of our larger clients, and they agree to the wire, send the wire, and then when everybody realizes it's fraud, then they want the money back. Once a wire is gone, the chances of getting that money back are slim to none. There's really nothing we can do once you have that wire gone. And if it comes through our wire room, a lot of times we're able to kind of look at it. We might call. We have to verify every wire that comes through, which means we have to call, make sure that every wire is good to go. If you have the service on your laptop or your computer, you can send wires without having to have that authorization. So we have caught some of those in the past. But again, there are some that have been adamant that this is a good wire, and our wire room has been like, okay, we authorize this, and once it's gone, it's gone. But yeah, we're seeing some of those things, and I think Joe mentioned a very important phrase, and it's digital hygiene. It's one of those things, and one of the cases I saw that drove me just insane is we had and we see, a lot of companies you'll see, unfortunately, you see bookkeeper fraud, insider fraud, and we kind of see that, from a perspective. And this was the easy one because this was a doctor who, I don't know if he just trusted someone too much, if he was lazy or what happened, but he shared his user ID and password with the one of the office managers that wrote out the checks and did the books and things like that. What we never advise you to give the administrative rights to anyone that is not, you don't have a check over. And so that was number one. He gave administrative rights to someone who really needed a restrictive view, and gave them his email, which, number one, that's a HIPAA violation. Whenever you give out, as a physician, and you give out your credentials for your banking, that is a HIPAA violation. You can't do that. Well, this person was not the most, didn't have the most character, and they decided that they were not paid quite enough and they needed to be paid a little more. So they began to send themselves checks through another company that they had set up, and they began paying themselves that. And so it rocked along because there was no one but that person doing account reconciliation. So the doctor didn't really want to bother with it. They didn't really look at their financial statements. So there was a couple of things we talked about. Number one, the bad digital hygiene. Don't give your user ID and password out, right? Don't do that. That's a no-no. Number two, there was no accounting. There was no reconciliation from the doctor's perspective or anybody else's perspective. If one more person would have looked at that and said, oh, there's a new vendor. What is this new vendor? Then, they would have caught this fraud long before they did. Unfortunately, they lost over $100,000 to this fraud before they figured out that this was a no-go. And so when we talk about the basic and simple things that we can do, it is just hygiene. That will go such a long way. And I know you're going to talk more about that, Ron, and what it can help do.
Well, I mean, the credential hygiene is just is so important, because now we're becoming increasingly focused on protecting the identity. And if you think about it, your credentials, your username, your password, all that stuff really is just your identity from a digital perspective. And if you don't safeguard it like you would your normal identity, then bad things are going to happen. We have a client where it amazes me sometimes that the people that are actually the owners of the company, or the folks whose name is on the door, are often the worst offenders. So we have a client, and they've been slow to adopt multi-factor authentication, in spite of us telling them to, because it was going to be too hard. It's going to take too much time. And similarly, they were reluctant to adopt the password manager that we provide them, which encourages them to constantly change passwords and not use the same one. Well, we have this person whose name is on the door. His password, everything was Alabama 7. And you're roll tide, right? But literally to everything. And so I think it was LinkedIn that got breached, and his password to that was Alabama 7. So they already knew his email address. So lickety split there in his email. And now this was a law firm, and they ended up having to notify all of their clients that they'd suffered a breach. And as far as multi-factor authentication being too hard, we were able to slam it into place in about 5 minutes and get the bad guys kicked out. But if we hadn't had a security team that was poised there and ready to respond to that, it would have been much worse. So, I mean, it's another example where just because you even have the technical tools or even have the written policies, if the people aren't doing it, then you're just wasting money, and you're no better off at all. So Joe, let's talk a little bit about what are the tools or what are the things that CISA offers the normal people out there that can help them be a little bit safer if they don't have somebody like us that is managing their security, managing their compliance and their IT and that sort of thing. What sort of things does CISA have out there that can kind of raise the bar for your general, air quotes, normal person?
Right. Well, we have several. One of the sort of unique things that CISA does is we sort of contract and fund nonprofit organizations that are sort of an extension of the government for resources and those kinds of things. And one of them is what I just mentioned, that MSISAC. That's multi-state. I'll put these in the chat, these links here in a little bit. But that's a big one that provides a lot of different guidance and support and those kinds of things. We have another one called CISecurity.org. That's the Center for Internet Security.org. That's the same sort of organization. They kind of work very closely together on that. There's just a host of information, on those sites and resources to help out. There's also, and when I say ISAC, that's Information Sharing and Analysis Center, right? So these are nonprofits that are focused on cyber information sharing within that sector. So for every one of those 16 sectors, we have an ISAC for. So there's a health, an H-ISAC. So if you Google that, I'll put the link in here, but it's health ISAC. And that organization has all kinds of alerts and things that are more specific to the health, industry there. But also just don't forget our website, CISA.gov. We have a lot of information there. It's not as easy to kind of navigate around our website, where some of us in the field aren't as happy with it, but use the search feature on the top right. You can put different terms in, healthcare or whatever, and we have sort of sections that are dedicated to that. But I also highly recommend signing up for our alerts. You can be on the email distribution from CISA. So when there's some sort of new alert, kind of thing, that it will alert you to that out there. A couple other things real quick to mention. I also threw a link down there in the chat for IC3.gov, and I didn't want to pivot off of that business email compromise without mentioning to Tom's point that there is a way to get your money stopped from transferring, but time is of the essence. This site IC3.gov is a joint effort between CISA, FBI, and Secret Service. Secret Service being the Treasury department. What's critical for them is if you have something, business email compromise, and you report it within about 36 to 72 hours is kind of the max. I would say more 24 to 48 hours is where you want to be from when the information has been transferred. But they can stop those transfers within a reasonable early kind of time. They've had like a 90% success rate with that. As that time gets past that 48-hour mark, it gets less likely, to Tom's point on that. There's a form that you have to fill out when you go to that site. I have an incident, and it tracks to all three of these agencies to do that, and it is safe and secure there. The other thing that I'll mention is we talked about that cyber hygiene, things. And so we have a service called Cyber Hygiene Scan. It looks for vulnerabilities. Yep. And so what we do is we utilize the same tools that the bad guys use. Essentially, they can use a phone on their cell phone, and they can scan for vulnerabilities that are in their town, in their area, by keyword. And if they know already what your IP addresses are, they can scan your network for vulnerabilities and exploit them, right? And it happens to be one of the most common causes of ransomware drops is unpatched equipment or old equipment that it's not updated, or just misconfiguration. Some things, the best option is not to have something exposed to the internet, right? So we utilize those tools and this scanning, and then all that's required from that is to have your IPs that your company purchases and that uses, right? And we generate a weekly report. It identifies those any devices that are exposed to the internet, whether they're vulnerable or not, and then also gives ideas and ways to mitigate that on there. So that's one of the best things that we do, that we promote. It doesn't actually touch your network and do anything. It's external, but also it is automatically enrolls you in what we call our ransomware vulnerability warning pilot. And this was a legislative directed program for CISA to manage on behalf of our government. You know, there was these things where the U.S. government was not hiding, but just not sharing a lot of information, or too many things were classified. And so the government said, look, if you have information that a potential target or organization is vulnerable, then you have to let them know. And so we do this a great deal. We do notifications, but this cyber hygiene scan will automatically enroll you in that program, because we'll have your IP addresses, and we'll know that if a particular ransomware actor is actively exploiting this particular device, you have it. And the last scan, you know, a month ago, that it was vulnerable, we just want to let you know about it. And in those kinds of cases, I look at it like a weather report. I'm just telling you it's going to rain. What you do is, after that, you don't owe anything back to the government for that. These are just notifications. And if I could take just another minute, Ron, on one of the things we also scan for is open vulnerabilities in medical devices, right? I don't know if we're going to talk about operational technology later or whatever. I could wait, but that's one of the key things that you might hear from us on recently, is that we're, again, using those same tools that the bad guy used, scanning for open medical devices that are touching the internet, that are accessible from an adversary. We're trying to find them before they do and let you know about it. And we give a lot of information to fix it. I will tell you that if you're not a cyber sort of expert, you might not be able to implement these recommendations. You'll need somebody like Ron's group and different people to kind of help, you know, with that at times. But a lot of them recently have been medical imaging devices, right? And it's a particular, you know, when you have like an X-ray or a CT scan, you have to those systems convert those from analog to digital. And there's systems called PACS systems that are imaging, you know, type systems that hold that information. A number of those are vulnerable and facing the internet. So we've been doing a lot of notifications. Again, I cover Tennessee and Alabama, and just about last 2 weeks, I've done probably 15 of notifications in the state of Tennessee and maybe 5 in Alabama in my area. So that's a common vulnerability and a thing to kind of look for, and it's probably not thought of often.
Well, and I love hearing happy stories, you know, like the tale. It's much more fun to hear the story of the people that were notified that they had a vulnerability and they closed it and lived happily ever after. Tom, what do you got like a happy war story where, you know, somebody almost got taken advantage of, but there was something that y'all were able to do to stop it? And in fact, PNC, don't y'all have like unique tools for healthcare to help recognize and prevent fraud? Tom? Uh-oh, we lose Tom? We did. Well, and I'll give a happy story about HIPAA. So one of my favorites is, you know, I kind of, my soapbox on this a little bit is everybody kind of panics a little bit because they don't know what to do. Everybody knows that the hackers are getting better and they're getting smarter. And meanwhile, the normal people generally aren't. I kind of blame my industry for that, honestly, because we've done a horrible job of training normal people on how to protect themselves. All we do is spew techno gobbledygook at them until they're so bored that they turn it off, and then another day goes by, the hackers got better and you didn't. So, you know, when the question comes, well, what do I do about it? Well, the good thing is that's kind of what HIPAA is for. You know, HIPAA was a driving force to try to prevent these things. And like I mentioned earlier, if you're seeing these things across HIPAA requirements, insurance requirements, soon to be legal requirements as well. And, you know, I find there's 3 easy things that someone who's subject to HIPAA can do to make their lives much easier. The first one is just accept it. There's still an awful lot of medical practices out there that just don't understand or wantonly refuse to accept that the law applies to them. And the teeth in it are very deep now with whistleblower laws. The receptionist in your medical practice can get paid 1 year's worth of your Medicare reimbursements for anonymously blowing the whistle on you for a HIPAA violation to the Department of Justice. So it's getting very real. But again, the carrot on that side is by complying with HIPAA, you're also building yourself a legal defense, because unfortunately for the doctors, y'all kind of have a triple threat. First, you get hit by the hackers, and that's bad, that's horrible. Then you get hit by the auditors, and a friend of mine always said that the auditors show up when the battle is over to bayonet the wounded. So then after you've resolved the hacker thing, the auditors show up and then they audit you and fine you. And then the lawyers show up with a class action lawsuit on behalf of your patients. Whereas if you just do the things that HIPAA prescribes and it doesn't mandate perfection, you just have to have progress, then it can insulate you from those legal things like a defense. And the example that I've got is there was a lab that had a guy decided that he'd apparently had some dalliances that made him question whether or not this burning sensation that he was having may have been associated with something a little extramarital. So he went to this lab to get an STD test. And what he didn't realize was that his mother-in-law worked at this lab. So the mother-in-law saw the order come across her desk. She recognized his name, obviously. She told her daughter what he was getting tested for. They had an awkward conversation at home, and it ended up with him suing the lab for a breach of HIPAA. Well, they got off. The lab got away with zero action or any corrective action or fines at all, because the mother-in-law had taken training at the beginning of the year that showed what their privacy policies were. And she had taken the training, completed the training, taken the test on what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. She had passed that, and she had attested that she understands those policies and would abide by them. So the fact that she went back on her attestation and simply acted on her own accord is not the lab's fault. So it did go to court, and the court found in favor of the lab and told the guy to go sue his mother-in-law. It'd be fun to find out how that lawsuit ended up. I bet that would be fun court records to read. But at any rate, just by doing the things that the law requires, which are not that hard, you protect yourself from those sorts of risks and liability. Keeping on with that, I foresee a time where a cybersecurity insurance policy for a medical practice is going to have one question on it. Do you comply with HIPAA? Yes, no. And if you say yes, you can have insurance. If you say no, you don't get insurance. And then if you file a claim, they're immediately going to want to see a printout of all of the things that you were doing at the time of the breach historically, because compliance and audits lives in the past, unfortunately. And even if you are doing the things, if you have MFA, multi-factor authentication, turned on like Joe's talking about, if it's not documented historically where you can go back and show that 18 months ago you had MFA deployed, then you're not compliant with what the law requires. So it's not that hard to do. You just have to accept it and train your people and work with professionals. And then it becomes, just a matter of course. Joe, what else are you, so tell me a little bit about, you had the SWAT team. When we were prepping for this a little bit, you talked, SWAT team's not the right term, but y'all actually have a team that will fly in and help with remediation efforts on attacks. Tell about that.
Yeah, we do have a headquarters team, specialist team that we could work with, for particularly if there's a major impact. It's critical infrastructure, right? So if there's a hospital system of systems, it's going to be impacting patient care, these kinds of things. Then we certainly want to full of government help, right? For you. But the flyaway team was mostly that CISecurity.org/MSISAC. We've had some organizations where they got hit by ransomware, and if you didn't have backups, you have to kind of rebuild all of your systems and computers, and can be quite intensive. And so we had a team that kind of from that group that would fly out and kind of help them and advise them. That's also my role locally. Again, local is to be an advisor, right? So that if I can help link you to the right people to get the help that you need, that's what we do. We don't do incident response. I mean, I don't touch keyboards and I don't do things that Ron's group does in forensics, inside, but things like, again, if it's like ransomware, there might be a decryptor available that the government is aware of. I highly, highly recommend you don't go to public sources to get decryptors. Most of those are Russian affiliated. So you don't want to get a decryptor from the bad guy and make things worse, right? In that, but the government, particularly the FBI, has cases open on all of these ransomware variants. So oftentimes we can go through that avenue and link up you with the right information and the right team that can maybe possibly help with the decryptor and whatnot. I mean, I understand that the insurance agencies, oftentimes call the shots, right? When you call them for that, they often don't want you to tell the government. And I'm trying to be an evangelist as well, Ron, to try to dispel that myth that the government's, going to come in and tell you, you can't pay the ransom. You can pay the ransom all day long. I mean, we recommend that you don't. We were always going to say that, and I can give you good reasons, for that. But you do what you feel you need to do, and we're not going to go tell everybody, right? All of your information with Homeland Security is protected by law that you share with us, and those kinds of things. So we have all kinds of protections from that. You can only get help. There's not any, 9 times out of 10, when we're able to talk with the insurance companies directly, we explain how we can help and what we could do. It's just giving information to help the threat hunters and help you get back to normal, right? On that. So it's kind of a good, I would say, partnership, to develop that. And if you're working with someone to develop an incident response plan, you need to know who the federal agencies are around you that can provide support to you, right? If you're in Alabama, the Alabama Bureau of Investigations has a cyber response capability, and hospitals and things like that. Healthcare are often considered state and local government. If you're the only provider, for that kind of care, for an area. And so they can help. You've got the FBI, you got, just a variety of different, type of sources that can help you.
That's great. I mean, it's good to see our textilers at least, at work to try to help. Normally I'm from the government, I'm here to help is a terrifying thing to hear, right?
I agree.
Yeah. Well, I hate that we lost Tom Stroud. I'm trying to there he is.
You come back in?
Yeah, I think I just had to elevate him and panelist down. I'm not Tom, are you back with us?
Hey, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, welcome back.
Thank
So
you.
we were trying to get
booted
to
off, and I apologize.
we were trying to get to happy stories here. So we were covering the things that CISA does to help folks. And I was asking you, because I know we talked about PNC has some fraud prevention. I mean, don't y'all have some unique things in the medical space to help out with this?
We do. We've got several really cool things. The way that we see people get paid the most is usually through a check or a ACH. And so, from check fraud prevention, which is one of our biggest ways, we have technology to combat the bad guys. And in our world, that's called positive pay. And positive pay is a checks and balances system where you can go online, upload your checks on a daily basis, and then evaluate those as they come through. And to make sure that if there's one that pops up that's not on your list, then we got to look at it. Did you forget to turn it in, or is it fraud? So where the bad guys are using technology to their advantage, we use technology to our advantage to be able to have checks and balances system. And so that gives you another set of eyes on your ACHs and your checks, so that we're kind of like your two-person verification for any type of accounting as far as money goes out from an ACH or a check writing perspective. The other thing that we have that's very unique to the healthcare profession, especially dentists and doctors that take insurance, is when you give your information to an insurance company to get paid, you're giving them your accounting number and your routing number. Well, you're giving it to United Healthcare. But at the end of the day, there's an individual that's looking at your information. And so we actually have, it's a masking account. It's called a UPIC. And that's just a fancy term for a fake account. And they see an account number and they look at the account number. It acts just like a regular account number. But at the end of the day, it's not the account number that we have on file for you. It's a fake account number. So if they try to use that account number, it's only for deposit. There can be no money that comes out of it. So they're using something that they can't have any access to. And so that's another level of security that's provided for incoming payments from healthcare companies, because at the end of the day, you know, it can be United Healthcare, it can be Viva, but those are just people on the other end of the line that are processing your payments.
That's great. I love it. And similarly, one thing that one happy ending that I'll kind of tie it together here, and then maybe we can kind of start wrapping it up, is the thing that makes me happy is, at least, you know, a couple of years ago, to make somebody more secure and safer from cybercrime and better protected, meant necessarily that we were making life more difficult for them. We were taking away access to things. We were restricting things. Now we've taken a different approach to where we've turned it upside down. So let me put it this way. This year, there will be 30 billion with a B, 30 billion devices on the internet. And most of those ain't yours. You know, you've got maybe 10, right? So what we're able to do now is going back to the identity thing that I talked about before. By protecting the identity and validating the identity, we can lock out all 30 billion other devices and only allow your known protected devices unfettered access to your data. And then we can exclude everybody by default. So if a Russian hacker has your username, your password, and even has your multi-factor authentication token, tough. They still can't get into your data because they're not integrated into your identity. And this has made it so much easier now, where it's a little bit of work, it's a lot of work to get it done. You know, it's a little bit of a challenge in the very, very beginning. But once it's done, the promised land is the employee shows up one day, they log in to their computer one time, and now they have access to everything that they need securely. And they're not having to remember passwords for a million different things. We're able to make life much simpler. And by doing that, it's also able to document it for HIPAA. So it's come a long way, and I'm glad to see that the banks are responding to use the tools at their disposal to make things safer. I really like the proactive stuff that CISA is doing to try to recognize threats and recognize vulnerabilities for those who may not even recognize them themselves, and then go the extra mile to contact them, even a phone call from Joe to let people know about it. And then we're doing the same sorts of things. So so what do we do now? Joe had put his contact information in email is joseph.parker@cisa.dhs.gov. I'm sorry, I meant to include that in there on this last on this slide. But so thanks those of you who have made it here. I'm going to give you an opportunity to get an extra entry into the drawing. I just posted into the chat a little survey. If we're going to do the drawing 30 minutes after the conclusion of this webinar. So if you would be so kind as to follow that link and answer 5 really easy questions, you'll get an extra entry into the drawing. And then similarly, if you'll schedule a consultation with either Tom or me, you can email Tom at thomas.stroud@pnc.com, or you can email me or go to booktheshoe.com and schedule a 15-minute phone consultation chat, and you'll get an extra entry into the drawing to Helen. So Tom, I guess I'll give you a final parting shot here from the PNC perspective. I don't see that we have any questions outstanding. So why don't you, leave us with something positive, and then I'll wrap us up finally.
Absolutely. And, the good news is that banks are working every day to make it safer for you to do your banking. We're making it easier. We're making it more secure. We're spending a lot of money doing so. And in the future, you'll see us using technology to combat the bad guys. But all of the technology in the world will not be able to stop a bad guy if you aren't responsible and if you don't practice, as we've talked about, good dental hygiene and have some things in place for your practice so that not just you, but your people understand what good digital hygiene is. If you're not auditing the phishing reports and you're not hiring someone out there to help with that, I would say please do that, because it takes just one time, and it's a lot of trouble for the practice to get back up and running again from both a digital perspective and a financial perspective. So let's make sure that we do our part, and then the bank is going to be working very diligently to make sure that we're one step ahead of the bad guys.
Yeah, we always have a kind of a running joke. You can't IT your way around bad behavior. If somebody's going to sink your ship, they're going to sink your ship. So Joe, why don't you put a little bow on this for us from the CISA standpoint? Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. And as I said earlier, the healthcare sector is a focus, and for good reason. Just this last February, I started in January. Well, in February, we had the Russian whole of government effort targeted our healthcare industry to try to do what we call a denial of service attack. And this group, just in my area, successfully took down about 15 or 20 hospitals initially from their website, so the web like portals and those kinds of things. Luckily, people were prepared. I would say in our area, we were very prepared. And even though it went down for a period of time, we were back up very quick. That's what it's about. It's about resiliency. And we talk about resiliency in a way that if you picture a spring, and when you have something happen in the cyber domain, not if, because it's just so pervasive now, you're going to have some level of something happen to you. The idea is that spring will bend, but it will bounce back to its original form. That's where you need to be with your backups, with your planning and these things. So when you're under stress, you know what to do and you're prepared, for these kinds of things. So working hard pays off now to do it, well ahead. And we're here to help. There's lots of resources for you to help. There's great industry folks, obviously from Ron and Tom, that have the true expertise to dive in there and help you. And I just encourage you to use them. You can do this. We can all do this. They're working together to disrupt us. We can work together to defend us. And everybody doing their part. If you do your part, you're helping somebody else. Just to that example I gave you with maybe the contractor wasn't doing their part and it hurt somebody else. It is a cascading effect sometimes, right? The more cyber hygiene that we all have, the better the whole country is overall. So thank you again. And I appreciate it, Ron, for the opportunity.
Yeah, my pleasure. Well, I guess the one takeaway I would add on to that is, when doctors exist because health is complicated and I'm not smart enough to take care of my own health. And so, you know what? I have a doctor. The law is really complicated and constantly changing. And so I don't dare represent myself. I have a lawyer. So when it comes to HIPAA and safeguarding your practice from hackers, regulatory authorities, or even internal threats, work with professionals. I mean, that's really what it takes. And we work with a third party ourselves called the Compliancy Group. I have them up here. And they help us manage our clients' HIPAA portals and HIPAA compliancy. So when the regulators do show up and say, I need to see a report from 6 weeks ago of XYZ, you go click, print and hand it to them, and they go off into the sunset. And so we've partnered with them to help us get ourselves buttoned up, because we got to be sure that we're taken care of as well. Because if we're serving healthcare clients the way we are, we got to make sure that we're as secure as we can as well. So just work with pros. And everybody, thank you very much for joining. We will be doing the drawing for in half an hour for the well, let's see. Actually, I do have a question. From Robin: how do you claim CE for this webinar? And the answer is I don't know. I'm sorry. That's not we can chat about that afterwards, but I don't know what sort of requirements are necessary to get this to kind of CE credits. But if you know what that would take, I would love to go about doing it, because what I was about to say is we're going to do this every month. The healthcare market is really important to us. It's the backbone of our society, and we want to do everything that we can to keep them safer, whether they're our clients or not. So stay tuned and look out for more of these, and we will look into getting that the continuing education credit for those of you, because we appreciate your participation and attendance. So with that being said, we'll get back with our winners here in about a half an hour. Good luck to everyone, and thank you very much for joining, and make every day safer from cybercrime.